I don't know if anybody else is planning to come, but it's already 6 or 7 after, so I guess we'll get started here. I'm going to share the screen and go over the agenda. Anyway. So I guess we'll do a quick set of introductions in the order that I see people on the screen. So I'll go first, and I'll stop the sharing so we can see everybody big when they say something. I'm Roger Rail, co-founder of CARD, and before that, co-founder and co-chair, now chair of Scioview Residents for Safe Water, and this is wrapping up my 27th year watching over the Gelman contamination. Liz, you want to go? Beth, you want to go next? You have to unmute.
Beth Collins, Ann Arbor resident and secretary of CARD.
And then Diane, you're next on our screen. Unmute first.
Diane O'Connell, recently appointed supervisor in Arbor Township.
So Diane, I want to talk to you later, make sure that Mike's got you all up to date on this situation.
What is it, 27 years to catch up on?
Yeah, we don't have to go through, maybe 26, 25 might be enough.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And then Michael, you're next. Got on
Mike
mute.
Moran, Ann Arbor Township trustee. And for those of you who don't know Diane, she has been on our planning commission for about 20 years and was a chair for about 12 or so, and is on the board of Huron River Watershed Council as well.
So is she up to speed, Michael?
I wouldn't say that. There's a lot of things I've been filling her in on, and this was not really one of them.
I should just ask, raise your hand on the
that,
screen if you're up to speed.
Yeah. I figure I'd leave that to perhaps you, and then as she attends these meetings, she'll pick up on it. And of course, there's always the websites that have a full history.
Right. Okay, Vince, you're next.
Hi, everybody. Vince Caruso, board member of CARD and coordinating member for the Allen's Creek Watershed Group.
And then next on my scene is CARD WC, which really SRSW is the sign-in. I didn't change the name.
Echo.
And that's just my second computer. So Kathy, you're next.
Kathy Knoll, SIO trustee.
And then Katie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Jositis from Congresswoman Diggle's office.
Okay, and then we'll do Dan Hamel last because it'll move right in. Well, go ahead, Dan. Say what you're next on the list here in mine. You got on mute, I think, or you're not setting close enough, one or the other.
I think I'm on mute.
Looks like you're unmuted. I just can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had some manila folders on it. You want me to go or wait till last?
Yeah, just introduce what yourself here. We're doing introductions.
Yeah, I'm Dan Hamel. I'm the EGLE project manager for the Gelman site, day-to-day project manager. We have a team. I'm the project manager. So.
Okay, and then Bob.
I'm Bob Bailey, a Scio resident and somewhat retired chemist.
Is that it?
If I talk later, people will hear a little more. So
Okay. And then Sue, you're next on my grid here.
Hi, I'm Sue Schenk. I'm the Washtenaw County Commissioner for District 2, and I am the board liaison to CARD.
And then Evan.
I'm Evan Pratt. I'm the County Water Resources Commissioner.
Good to see you in person, Evan.
Yeah. Yes, likewise. I can't grow the beard, though. I'm impressed.
Well, this is the first one I've ever had, and you should have seen me like a week and a half ago. Some people did see me. I looked like Tom Hanks in Castaway. And David Silkworth, you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm a resident of Ward 5. So,
Just a resident?
well, I'm running for city council right now, but I'm just a resident. Who cares about the issue? So.
No. Okay, good. And then Shanna, you're next. Unmute first.
I'm Shauna Milkey. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor.
And former CARD secretary. And then Rita, same household as Vince, different room.
Actually, same room, back to back.
Are you?
I'm Rita Locke Caruso.
Oh, I see another arm coming out of your neck. I guess that.
There he is. Yeah, that's it. That's not a growth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a resident of Ann Arbor. I'm professor of toxicology at the University of Michigan and charter member of CARD.
And then Patty, you're next.
Hi everyone, Patty McCall with Tetra Tech.
And then Kristen. Get on mute first. There you go.
Yeah, normally I can use the space bar, but that wasn't working. Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Schwickel. I'm the Environmental Health Director with the Washtenaw County Health Department.
And finally, Colleen just joined us. You want to introduce yourself? We're just wrapping up introductions.
Hi everyone, I'm Colleen. I'm a PhD student from Wayne State.
Okay, very good. So let me go back to sharing here.
The next item is the approval of the minutes from the June 2nd meeting. Do I have, for the board, a board vote? Do I have a board member that'll motion?
I make a motion.
Roger, and someone.
I'll second.
Vince, and all in favor?
Aye.
Great, minutes are approved.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for doing it.
You're welcome.
Oh, I got it.
All right, then Dan, if you want to unmute, and everybody else stay muted while Dan goes through his old business updates. And if you have questions at the end, then you can unmute and ask the questions. By the way, this whole session's being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want recorded.
As all CARD meetings are, right, Roger? You post.
You might have to settle a little closer, Dan. Your volume's still a little low.
Okay, I'm picking up. Yeah, the EGLE old business items, the status of the trend analysis is the same. We are planning, we're not completing the trend analysis, if you want to say work plan, from Gelman and our evaluation of that until we start identifying and start working on the monitoring plans that will be developed after the CJ draft CJ is signed. So that has been ongoing that way. We have had some back and forth discussions with Gelman, some questions back and forth, but not a formal review yet because they haven't presented. They presented that report last year, but we're going to have, it'll be a more detailed work plan in how we're going to be using the statistics and using those to evaluate and determine sampling intervals for monitoring wells under the new CJ. So the status of the new compliance wells on the View development is the same. For those that don't remember, the developer asked if Gelman to abandon some wells on the property over there. Some of those wells were compliance monitoring wells under the current CJ. And so Gelman asked us, and we approved the go ahead and abandoning them, and that was done last September. We will, once the CJ is signed, we will install new compliance wells related to implementation of the 7.2 criteria. As I've said, we really didn't want to just put a well in for replacing a well at the same location or a couple feet away or couple tens of feet away. We wanted to be able to utilize wells in the proper locations and strategic locations, the best locations for compliance monitoring wells to monitor the 7.2 criteria under the new CJ. So that's where, as far as update, the next one, any update on EGLE DHH adjusting VI numbers? I sent out the memo from our toxicologist that evaluated Bob Bailey's calculations. I think Bob even talked to him several times during this last month. I sent that out as the question, the way it's put there, are we adjusting any VI numbers? We're still, we're not identifying any adjustment right now. Most of the issue down there is going to be is really going to be not having a general number, not just that VI number, the 1900 number, as a screening number, but most of what will happen down there is going to have to be site-specific numbers of evaluation. And I just want to reiterate what I said last month too. Is EGLE regulates the groundwater, that contributes. In the indoor air number is we don't regulate that. That's DHHS regulates that indoor air number, which eventually is what is looked at for risk in a building related to dioxane. So water in a basement is in that middle part in that zone where really it's going to have to be a site-specific evaluation, including most likely indoor air samples related to that. But we are working with the EGLE, EGLE and DHHS are working together in anticipation of the Ann Arbor sampling of some water in basements. That's I believe been authorized. It's just waiting to be implemented, so we can have good discussions and answer any questions as they come up related to results of that sampling. Okay, the next one, D, is monitored wells not tested in many years. I've been compiling a list of wells. I even this last month here, since the last meeting, I even got Gelman. I requested from Gelman a list out of their database of what wells they have identified that they aren't sampling. I got that, but I got that today. So I haven't compiled or coordinated those lists together. What I hope to do is send back to Gelman next week the questions of because I've already very quickly seen that, hey, I don't have an explanation of why this well hasn't been sampled. A particular well hasn't been sampled since 2015. So I'm a little further along, I promise. You can't really see it, but the information from Gelman got a little confusing here. So I'm going to be sending back to them, like I said, next week, some questions on specific wells. And as soon as I get a compiled list with answers, for example, some of the answers are some of the wells that were the question that I got question about were allowed to be under the old monitoring plans, the latest ones in 2011. There were wells that were identified that no longer, needed to be, or we approved that they no longer needed to be included as sampling. A lot of those are internal wells and those types of things of the plume. So yeah, we're getting a little closer to answer your questions, and I've requested the rival party to get involved to help me with that. Let's see here. Did Roger get his coordinates? Yes, I sent the coordinates to Roger on right after the last meeting. I think June 4th is what the email that I saw, Roger. There were some coordinates that you asked, and Neil sent me some info. And then I made sure those coordinates were in the database too. So that is the old business that I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I just want to point out that it's good to see the coordinates in all the new sample locations in a timely fashion.
Right. I would, there are sometimes I get delayed in doing that. Once we have new sample locations, I don't put all the cells in, because right or wrong, I'm slow at it and doing it probably the most inefficient way of just putting them individually. So, if you see something, point it out to me, and I'll update something as soon as I can.
Yeah. So the report you got was a paper report or a PDF. Is that electronic in any way? The one you held up to show us of the wells that are no longer sampled?
Yeah, it was an Excel file.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I was gonna, like I said, I'm generating my own Excel file, and so
they did not send it to you in a tabular form?
Okay, Roger, what do you mean tabular?
Did they send it to you as a electronic list?
Yeah, an Excel file with electronic list, wells, name of a well, date installed, and then notes. I asked for any notes of if they had it in their database, for example, why they stopped sampling, whether the well, and so they are in that process. They didn't give me all the notes that I wanted. But they sent it as an Excel file, so it's tabulated.
So do you think they have that information, now they have that information stored, but they didn't have it stored before they had to compile this list? Or what do you think? Where do you think that information came from Gelman?
They told me. I asked for it, and they said it came out of their database.
So it was in their database, but we didn't have it.
Right. I mean, they have that their laboratory information system, their LIMS management system, their LIMS system. If you're used to know what that is.
I'm curious what else might be in their database that the regulators and the public doesn't have access to that we should have access to.
Well, I mean, I can't.
Because you don't know, right? You don't know what's in their database either. You're a regulator.
I don't know their LIMS system, no. I know.
So that's a point, always a point of concern, especially in these negotiations. Like, okay, it's your dioxide in our waters of the state. Give us all the information you have about your dioxide in our waters of the state. And here is already an example where they had this information, but they weren't sharing it until we asked for it because. Yeah, anyway, I mean, that's my normal gripe about this. Well, you really should have full information. They're withholding information that the public needs to know. Anybody else got a comment they want to make about the old business before we go on to the updates?
So I'd like to ask if we're going to discuss the EGLE's evaluation of Bob Bailey's analysis. In reading it, I see some issues that I'd like to address at some point. I'm not sure if we're going to discuss that tonight. At what item would that be covered?
Hey, Vince, I'm not sure. Well, I'm not the person that you want to be asking the question.
I just want to put them on the record, though.
Okay, if that's that's the case. I mean, I'm not,
Right.
you know, that was generated from our toxicologist, and I would want to make sure I get the technical part.
The only, one of the main issues would be that way back, oh, I don't know, 2 years ago, we talked about vapor intrusion with EGLE at these CARD meetings and discussed whether contaminated water entering a basement and evaporating, that would be considered vapor intrusion. And there was some discussion and back and forth. And after a couple meetings, EGLE came back, I think it was EGLE or DEQ, and said, yes, we're going to consider that vapor intrusion. So that brings up the issue of how much water are people getting in their basements. And I would like to tell you that there's quite a few homes on the west side that have wet basements 24 hours a day, 365 days a week or a year. A continuous wet basement is not that uncommon. We've had basements that have been undermined because of the groundwater close to the basements, where the basement walls have been replaced in many neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods, all the walls or all the buildings had walls replaced. So it's a major issue on the west side, maybe other parts of the city. And I think when I looked at the write-up that Bob got, they're proposing 29 part per billion as a concerned level for indoor evaporation of contaminated water. So that has me very concerned since we're at 20 part per billion now, and it hasn't been tested in many months, contrary to what we were told was going to be a more routine test. So I don't know what it's at now. It could be at 30 because it's been going up every test that's been done. So I have some real concerns about exposure to homeowners, the issue of wet basements, and that is a real concern that many homes have wet basements in Ann Arbor. They're not flooded basements necessarily, but they're wet and they have water evaporating into their basement, which is a confined space, and they're potentially getting exposed to 1,4-dioxane as it evaporates with the water. And I think that's a problem that we need to straighten out. And to say that this is not a issue for HHS is a problem for me, because I think that we've gotten EGLE to comment that water entering a home with 1,4-dioxane will be considered vapor intrusion. If that's the case, it looks like their number that they propose is 29 part per billion seeping into someone's basement. And so that's a real concern. I think we need to make sure we get a handle on that and where we're going. And if everybody's on the same page with it as far as exposure, wet basements, how many wet basements there are on the west side, and whether it's part of EGLE's purview to regulate this as a vapor intrusion issue. I did send along some of this information that Bob Bailey has gotten to Stuart Batterman at the university and his postdoc. So I haven't heard back from them, but they sound like they're very concerned about this as a research effort as well as an exposure issue. And hopefully they can help us make some determinations here and provide some expert help where needed. Thanks.
Bob, did you want to weigh in on this since we're talking about this right now? It's old business.
Yeah, I talked with Morrison at the who's really a toxicologist, but he was the person who's working with RRD, the remediation group, on updating the vapor intrusion. And basically what they've done is simply follow the EPA lead, which doesn't talk about this water intrusion. So Dan Bicknell and I were talking a few days ago, and it seems like the next step is to get the EPA on board with it, and then eventually EGLE or its successor will follow along. So I'm working this week on trying to come up with a nice way to present the information in a format that Dan thinks, this is Dan Bicknell, thinks that would appeal to the EPA. And we'll see where this idea goes.
What I've been showing here
One
is
problem with the 29 that they came up with, it turns out that agrees with what I calculated for a flooded basement. So I think that's probably unreasonable because basements really aren't flooded, but they're damp. So that's why we need to sort of put together a package that would appeal to the EPA with ways to measure the amount of water seeping in and so on. And it turns out that fortuitously, there's an ASTM standard for how to measure the rate of water seeping through the concrete.
All the numbers
So we can,
that are calculated in the equations, you know, they all have assumptions that are utilized, general
Sure.
assumptions, and so you change those assumptions, you'll get the different numbers. The 29 micrograms per liter screening number that was calculated earlier a couple years ago, that was identified, had the assumptions, and it went to 1900 because the assumptions were very conservative for the 29, and the 1900 are more are more of a realistic, for the days of exposure, like you said, wet basements for the exposure assumption, would have to have 350, 360 days a year of a flooded basement, and to calculate back the 29 screening level of groundwater outside coming in from the outside. So I'm not a toxicologist. I think if you compile your information and questions and that thought, we can get it back to Shane, back into the group, and including DHHS toxicologists who regulate the air. It's evaporation. Once it gets in the house. So.
Yeah. Well,
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
Too, real quick. So I was on the call with EGLE and DHHS, and as Dan said, DHHS does regulate vapor intrusion. So Bob, I'm not sure what you and Dan Bicknell are working on with the EPA, but if there's a concern of risk, that's already addressed in Michigan through the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And they're aware of the concern and the numbers. And we're also keeping an eye on any of the data that comes out of the City of Ann Arbor study. And it's my understanding that that hasn't been scheduled yet because of COVID, but may pick up as early as this fall, but I don't have a firm date on that yet. But again, the appropriate agency would address it, and it's the Department of Health and Human Services.
So you've talked to the people at Health and Human Services about this?
Yep.
Have they seen this graph?
I do not know if they have seen your website.
No, it's not my website.
They are aware
this is
of
data. This is the company's data. Do they know that there's 300 plus parts per billion heading towards people's basements? This is the only shallow well where the ground surface falls away before you get down to West Park.
But they also have seen the data that was done in 2016 that had single digits, I think 1 and 2 in the specific neighborhoods that we were looking at.
But that's only, yeah, but that's in the
also, I'm sorry, I'm still just trying to finish my thought. I think they also had, Dan, I think you also provided the Allen Creek drain data, if I remember correctly.
The Allen Creek drain report that we gathered from the sampling.
Kristen, can you send me the contact who you talked to?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure they know this isn't hypothetical. This is going to happen.
No, they understand that, Roger. I mean, I'd like to think that I can also convey some of that information information to them, but I'm happy to put you in contact with them directly. These are the toxicologists. So they're the ones that are just crunching numbers. And so they're looking at it in terms of numbers and data more so than like whether it's real or hypothetical. They're looking at what are those action levels from a purely science standpoint.
Well, thanks. Actually, if we go upstream from this, one of the concerns we have is that some of these other shallow wells have even higher concentrations. They aren't quite as shallow as that one. And some of them just haven't been sampled. Like this one hasn't been sampled for 4 years. We talked about that earlier though, but that's Dan's list of wells that haven't been sampled. We have to be aware that there's some sampling going on, missampling going on here that we have to fill the gap, because without the data, we really don't know what's going on. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
That list that I'm working with, that list was generated with Jenny and I. You know, the Washtenaw County is working together on wells that aren't being sampled, because they have to take questions too about monitoring, near homes, near people's homes, and what wells, and what's the nearest well, and they're looking up that information too. So it's not just my eyes on it of what has not been sampled. Jenny has done a detailed evaluation and has presented that information to me, and I will be, I presented it partly to Gelman with some questions, and I intend to continue questioning them of, why is this has not been sampled? It's not anywhere where we have authorized that it not be sampled, like some of the wells are in monitoring plans. So I hope to have that here in the near future before the end of the summer.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I want to make one more comment about. I'd like to make a comment if I could. Sure. That the originally this contamination was supposed to be flowing through the city underground. There was never any discussion about this flowing near the surface and exposing homeowners' homes. That's happening now, in my opinion. We're getting homeowner exposure, maybe low levels. We don't know because we're not testing it, but it's totally out of the realm of what we've been discussing for the last 30 years, that this was supposed to be a contamination that was sequestered underground and not come to the surface. And I think, it's a whole new scenario that I think we need to evaluate in a different way, and not assume that, well, we're just going to keep kicking the ball down the court until, somebody else takes office and decides to deal with it.
Yeah,
I think
and it's really not a new thing, because
residents to know.
We knew since 2006, 2007 that the land surface falls away, exposing these contaminated aquifers. So it's been 13, 14 years that we've been aware that this is going to be venting near people's homes and basements. And we need to, it's way past time to be doing more about it. So.
We're not protecting, they're not protecting residents. I don't think, the current set of DEQ rules, as bad as they are not even as bad as they are not protecting the residents of Ann Arbor. And wells in Ann Arbor Township and South Township have been contaminated as well. So we need to be more proactive, I think, to make sure we don't expose residents to this.
Yeah, it's an ongoing issue. Thanks, Vince. Anybody else?
I have a follow-up question to that. This is Sue.
Yeah, we see you.
Okay, all right. Not sure, it's hard in these meetings sometimes. So when I'm listening to this, what I think I'm hearing is that no basements are being tested for the level of dioxin that may be in the water that is flowing into them. Is that correct?
So the City of Ann Arbor set aside, I think it was $40,000 to do sampling of basements. And Patty, I don't know if you want to speak to the project, because I think it was Tetra Tech that was going to be actually doing the work. And they had that approved back in March, but at this time they hadn't moved forward because everything got shut down for 3 months.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's what you were saying that
Yeah,
earlier,
so
that it
there's
was
a-
going to
so
happen.
the
It
city
didn't
manager
happen.
is moving forward with testing basements.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
those
it
those
should
tests
happen.
were somewhat inappropriate because they're way too high up. They should have come to the card group and asked for advice from the card group and did not. So they ended up doing a lot of testing in inappropriate areas, high in the
What
elevation.
testing that
It
they
should have been farther.
There's been no testing done.
What testing are you talking about, Vince?
I thought there was testing done west of 7th Street.
Well, Batterman did testing without.
But the city never got around to doing that yet.
The city hasn't done any testing of basements that I'm aware of.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I'd
They
like
were
to think I'm
they were
aware.
planning to. They were planning to and haven't done it yet.
That is
All
correct.
right. Okay.
Yep.
So do you know, is there a plan that the city has that CARD could, I mean, I understand that the city might not want to cede authority to CARD, but would the city possibly take CARD's input on those locations to satisfy the concern that the testing locations be appropriate? And I realize there may not be anybody in this meeting who can answer to that, but in terms of trying to find a way forward that brings us together, that seems like that would be a really good idea.
So I can respond to at least one piece of that on behalf of the city. So in speaking with Dan Bicknell, he had requested the Chapin Street be added, and that was added to the plan.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And just, you know, in point, like, so Patty's been coming to these meetings, City of Ann Arbor elected officials have been coming to these meetings for years. So I do think that they're pretty engaged in terms of what CARD wants and has an understanding of that.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to insult anybody at all. I'm new here, quite frankly. I've only been coming to these meetings for a short time as the board liaison.
Well, a lot of the wells that were proposed, a lot of the houses that were proposed to be tested, the CARD group, I think, would have indicated that those were way too high up. And we knew that there probably wouldn't be groundwater close to those homes. And to test farther east would have been much more productive and effective.
So I know I personally have requested of you, Vince, a list of homes and areas that you want tested. I haven't seen that yet. So if you want to provide that, I'm happy to take a look at that and compare it to the list that we currently, well, I think the city currently has, and see where there's overlap and see maybe where there's gaps.
Well, homes down on Chapin Street, homes down in the Chapin Street area.
Yep. So can just
would be effective. That's on the list now. Yeah, it wasn't on the list originally.
Yep. Send me whatever list you
Well,
think.
I think it's important.
Can I speak to that? Vince, one of the parameters that we were provided was that we had to stay within the 1 part per billion plume boundary. So in looking through the data, we had to stick to that. Chapin Street almost entirely is outside of the 1 part per billion plume boundary that Scio map has. We use a Scio map rather than the county map because it's a little more, it's wider. It includes more homes.
Well, if we
So
had
that's why
groundwater monitoring, we'd know where the contamination would be. We have no idea where it is in that neighborhood.
Right.
It could be down at Chapin. We've not tested down there for a long time.
Chapin Street was added.
But I know, I'm just saying that originally the plan was not to do effective testing, in my opinion, because there wasn't much communication with the CARD group as to what we would say would be more effective testing location.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. I think the CARD group has talked about this for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Are there dates coming up? Because I know with masks and stuff, I had DT&E came in my house and did a whole evaluation of my windows, and I don't know if you're getting resistance though. I mean, I understand if you wouldn't go in unless they let you in and wanted.
Right. So I think at this point, there's a few things that have to work through the city. And I had a discussion with Brian today. We're trying to target probably in August for a presentation, and it's sort of a kickoff. But it's not in my hands, and it's sort of not in Brian's hands right now. There's some internal review that's being completed in order to be able to go into people's homes. So,
okay, because that's the next, well, after the Allen Creek item, it's you kind of just said, so that's C on the agenda. The public presentation and everything then is just still on hold.
yeah, no dates are set yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else before we move on? Okay, let me go back to the agenda. So now it's time for EGLE's updates. Go ahead, Dan.
I check in as I always do before.
To interrupt you, Dan.
Roger, yeah, you skipped.
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
You skipped the B on the agenda, and then the and D. But B, and since Evan's with us, maybe he wants to talk about B. Status of the Allen Creek drain.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We should go back and do that. Yes. Evan.
We skipped over.
We only had finished EGLE's unfinished business, but
Right. Good point.
Well, all these things are kind of interrelated, so no offense taken. So we have been in contact, of course, with the permits division regarding MS4. I mean, they are a little less familiar, of course, with a lot of the details on site remediations in this one, and they have been coordinating, as far as I know, with Dan Hamel and Jerry Tiernan, and the team working on the dioxane cleanup. So we've met a couple of 3 times. Typically,
Evan, can you, for the new people on, can you give a little brief introduction of what an MS4 violation is, why it's there, and how it's administered?
Sure. MS4 violation is probably not an accurate terminology here. That's Dan Bicknell's terminology. A violation would typically be when you're notified that you've done something wrong and you're responsible for fixing it. MS4 is an abbreviation for a program that the EPA has through the Clean Water Act. And there's 4 S's: municipal, separated storm sewer system is what MS4 stands for. And all urbanized areas are required to have whatever governmental agency has jurisdiction is required to have a plan and identify all locations where they have stormwater infrastructure that discharges into surface waters. So this is basically the EPA regulating in the areas that are most likely to have some type of pollutant loading. And there is a requirement or obligation to be periodically looking for things that shouldn't be in a storm drain. For example, several years ago, some city workers smelled something funny up the creek a little bit on Allen's, and as it turned out, some of the plumbing from Wolverine Brewing was incorrectly plumbed. So one of the bathrooms and all of the I don't know what you'd call it, the brew water, the discharge from the brewing operation after it had gone through all the hops and stuff, so some pretty skanky stuff, was coming into Allen Creek. And so once we got alerted to that, we had to follow up, get back to the source and address it. The issue, as Dan Bicknell has correctly pointed out, when there is a pollution, particularly an ongoing pollution set up, whether people feel it's being managed well, not at all, whatever those thoughts are, Dan has correctly pointed out that there are 3 options in the EGLE protocols. One option is to issue an NPDES permit that establishes a limit to whatever pollutant is going in there. And that limit can be stricter than the state standards that would normally apply for whether it's drinking water or VI or whatever. The MS4 program typically is looking for addressing, and that may not mean removing, but addressing any pollutants above 0. So whether it's phosphorus or nitrogen or something nastier like we've got with 1,4-D, they don't want to see anything in municipal stormwater systems. Again, though, as I say, there's 3 options when they do find that, and there is an ongoing action or a pending action. Again, one action is issue a permit and establish a limit, and then monitor that limit to make sure that it's not getting any worse, let's say. Another option is to require that pollutant to be removed by whomever is the source. We can all sit here and believe and agree and not be able to find anybody else but Gelman, but ultimately that, probably requires a little time and energy. The third option is they are also allowed to line the pipe so the groundwater no longer enters the pipe. So, of course, I love that one. It would be nice to tighten the system up, but that probably wouldn't be helpful to people's basements. A lot of times, utility pipes and utility trenches more so are actually a slightly friendlier conduit for groundwater. So, this is very consistent with Dr. Lemke and anybody else who has talked about, it's not so much an underground lake, but a lot of tendrils that are finding geologic areas. So anyway, 3 options for doing that. And, they're all challenging right now. The short version, as we've mentioned before, is we're trying to get through resolution to the current consent judgment, because although you could say this is an issue that fits into the consent judgment and could be wrapped into it, on the other hand, we're talking about a different separate statute that would allow this to be pursued separately if necessary. And I would like to see that we have a clear understanding of what does that monitoring network look like before we agree to anything that says, they might be issued an NPDES permit, or they might be asked to do additional pumping. Well, how is that going to affect what we're trying to do with the big goal, which is we got to get this dioxane better out there. We've got to have a better approach. We've got to have a better mechanism, and whether that better mechanism comes from consent judgment or EPA, I think we'll know in the near future here where we stand. And if it's going to be an EPA thing, then I think it's a little easier to move forward and just go ahead and say, let's address this as a one-off issue. I did talk to the county's legal counsel last week just to make sure this was still on his radar. And I asked him specifically to make sure that Gelman is aware that, it's not like we're going to make up a new thing as soon as they sign a deal, but it is an issue that I can't believe Gelman is not aware that is going to have to be addressed. So my hope was to be able to be addressing this as we were coming into summer and getting a game plan for, well, which of those 3 pathways is EGLE leaning towards? Do we agree with that, disagree with that? Again, I'd love to have the pipes lined because they're old and that would extend the serviceable life of those. But I don't know that wouldn't, I believe that might cause a little bit of groundwater level rise, which from the earlier descriptions of concerns out there, I don't know that really helps anybody. In my little world, I would love that. I don't want nasty water getting in the pipes, and I'd rather not worry about it and have that be somebody else's problems. But
yeah. So Evan, I know that drains are your
short version.
Bailiwick. Drains are your bailiwick. What data, what information would help you in your job to predict what's going to happen as this dioxane moves through this aquifer, which is basically a pipe to the river? What's that going to do to your drains and the liability that it imposes on the city and the county as their dioxane enters your pipes? What information do you need now to help you make your decisions on these?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is going to be, what is that shallow groundwater monitoring gonna look like? Where are those wells gonna be? I get the idea that Dr. Lemke has made some recommendations on what that might look like, but until that consent judgment gets shared publicly, which I understand it will be shared publicly before anybody votes on it. I'd like.
Are you certain of that?
That is what I keep hearing. That's what I keep being told by the council member.
I know
Commissioner Schenck.
That's what people want, but
say
there
otherwise.
was a time.
It's a process thing.
There was a time when government said, "Well, if you don't agree to this, you can't share it with the public."
I don't believe that's the current setup. Again, I'm not in the middle of that room, but I gather that it's coming along. So that's the main thing. What's already being proposed for shallow groundwater monitoring, and then what do we need to do to supplement that to, I'd love to have a plan that says we're going to try to divert this groundwater from getting into the pipe. But as I understand it from some of Dr. Lemke's public presentations, if you put in a well, let's say between West Park and, you name the location, whether it's between West Park and Urbana or West Park and Ravenna, or even further, up the way, you're pulling water to that well. And is all the water going to get into that well or not? You'd rather be trying to stop that water from being drawn any faster in the direction that it's going. I would like to see what they're proposing for that, basically, though, just to have a better sense of it.
Well, we could start by finding out where the dioxin is in the groundwater, and that'll give you information to go on.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good sense of that from even what we did before. I understand, some people would have liked to seen a much more robust analysis, but in my mind, it was the half a dozen samples that Dan and his team pulled up were really a screening to determine, hey, do we need to jump up and down and kick a wastebasket and say, you got to have shallow groundwater immediately? And, I'd love to say that those results that we had between 15 and 20 parts per billion did that, but I don't think that does. It's not like we found holy cripes, it's going up and up every month. It really was chattering all over the place. So we would like to see groundwater cleanup progressing. And to me, that is going to be the biggest help to not having the dioxin levels continue to increase in the pipes. I'd like to see reassurance that that's not going to happen. And I'd like to see data points at shallow monitoring wells that prove to us that that's not happening. At the same time,
so you're in favor. You're in favor of permanent shallow groundwater sampling.
Yeah, absolutely. And the city's moving forward with that, and I don't think they should have to pay for it out of pocket. But I think they're looking at where that would be. And if it was me, I'd be asking for somebody who should pay for it to pay for it. And I can't say exactly what's going on, but I think we all can sit on the sidelines and believe that people are sharp enough to ask for that. I know a lot of other points, everybody's not exactly on the same page, but at the highest level, I don't think anybody disagrees that we have to have shallow groundwater monitoring. And, I'd like to see some more extraction. I just don't want the extraction to be pulling higher concentrations, faster down gradient than they already are. And I'm pretty good with the surface water and the rain and the sewers, but I'm not so good with the groundwater. I don't have the background with that. And people like Patty and Dr. Lemke are people that I know understand the geology and underground hydraulics a lot better than I do in that area. We're going to keep working on it. At the end of the day, I think, the MS4 people are also eager to resolve this with the RRD division, the folks that oversee cleanups, and identify which of those three pathways. Quite honestly, if we've got good monitoring and a more robust cleanup going on, I'm fine with any of those three pathways. And I kind of feel like, you know, this has been an EGLE site, so it's almost as much for EGLE to go back and forth and decide how this MS4 fits into the problem. I don't feel like an MS4 regulator should be laying a heavy hammer on our office, and they haven't. We didn't create the problem. We believe we understand where it's coming from, and I don't believe it would be very challenging for us to, I don't want to spend money on an attorney to go and prove legally that Gelman is supposed to pull this stuff out, because I feel like that really is more in EGLE's hands as part of the cleanup. That said, I'm willing to do that if we are not seeing a satisfactory outcome from the consent judgment. I'll leave it at that. I know you recorded that, so come back to bite me. But I don't mind kicking the wastebasket when the time comes. I just want to know better what's going on in the area otherwise.
I think some people are kicking the wastebasket because they're worried that this contamination has been going up regularly every time it's been tested. It hasn't been tested in quite a while now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to finish my statement by saying that Dan has told you guys that he's going to do the shallow groundwater monitoring yet this year. And I believe he has shared with everyone, you know, that reads the notes or comes to the calls, that will include sampling of at least the West Park and Chapin Street. As far as I'm concerned, you don't need to sample those. And Vince, I am going to disagree. It's not going up and up. It went up quickly in 1 year. And what I see is chatter in the numbers that they've had. The 22 was the most recent number that they got. But then again, there were lower numbers in between earlier. So I think if we graph this stuff, it's hard to agree. And, you know, this is not precision science. Somebody is going there, sticking a tube that's duct taped to the end of a stick in the manhole or climbing down physically. Somebody's in a lab doing what you do in a lab. And there are statistical margins of error in that stuff. I don't know what they are. I just wanted to make sure we had some understanding that you couldn't clearly say this is an upward trend and we can all agree. I mean, I think we've got something that we have to keep an eye on, and there's no reason to believe that it's not going to go up if we don't start seeing something different out there, right?
We need more testing, I think, to actually get a better handle on what kind of potential exposure.
The testing in the drain is very imprecise about what's actually in the groundwater.
Yeah, we need more knowledge about what's going on. The West Park test was a really simple, straightforward, hard for EGLE to not do that test. It wasn't a be-all, end-all, but it was a way to collect that data.
Vince, we need to move on with this. Everybody knows we need more testing, but we need it in the groundwater more than in the drains.
Yeah, and
let's move on to the next issue.
The last thing I would just say for the group, I know there's been emails out there, and I don't think I agree with Mr. Bicknell's assumptions and analyses, particularly because there is not a correlation between the rainfall events he points to and dilution. There's definitely not a correlation. That was not noted in his document or whatever. And it's also my personal professional opinion that the amount of rains that we're seeing prior to would not have resulted in additional water in there. You know, it's information that's out there, and it's something we want to keep an eye on. But I don't think you're seeing wildly diluted information there. Maybe it's a couple of ppbs one way or the other, but I think the sampling errors, and this was supposed to be, to me, this was let's do it quick and dirty and find out if we've got something that's more important than the thousands of ppbs that we've got in those hot spots. That those things that really need to get more attention. So that's all I have.
Thanks. Okay, now let's move on to the updates, because that 15-minute update, the 25-minute update took an hour. So maybe we can speed these up a little bit here.
Yeah, I don't have. Is it my turn, Roger?
Yeah, your turn, Dan.
Okay, the NPDES permitting the renewal. That's what that is indicating there. I've checked with the water resources. There's no change. They are still evaluating that permit. Again, they are well aware that you want input. There will be a public meeting. The next step is they will be discussing the permit with the client, with the PRP, Gelman. And then once that's they've done that discussion, they will release it and schedule a comment period and a public meeting. So that's the same. I confirmed that this week. So I will keep on that, and they are quite aware, because I keep asking every month, identifying the card. I'm going to the card meeting and any new information. So they're well aware of the concerns.
And if they're going to have a public meeting, they're probably planning for a remote type public meeting, because you don't want to get people in the same room, obviously.
Meetings. If it goes on here while COVID is still involved, it will be it'll be a remote meeting that they are currently doing for our program. It will not be.
New way of doing things. What about what's the next item here? 2020 home well sampling.
I'm going to need a little bit of help from, believe it started in the week of June 15th. Again, Washtenaw County is the people that are actually doing it. So I'm going to need a little help from Kristen if she has any better information. But Jenny had told me prior when she took off that they were planning on the week of the June 15th. Again, Kristen, are you still on?
She's on.
Do you have any more information on that?
Yeah, so we went ahead and sampled, I don't have the exact number of homes, but I want to say it was close to 200 or just under 200 homes that I think we had agreed to.
Yep, that was this year. Yep.
And we got through those. I think we did 4 sampling days the week of June 15th and 3 or 4 sampling days the week after. It was a little bit challenging because those were our literal first days officially back at work, at least in the office. But yeah, no, we were able to complete those and are just awaiting the results. I haven't gotten any yet. I know the lab was absolutely swamped because we had so many samples that we were submitting. But yeah, I haven't heard, and I did talk to Jenny yesterday. She's on medical leave. She'll be back next week. So
good. I was worried about when she said she's on medical leave.
Yep, she'll be back next week.
And it wasn't a one. Good.
So what happens is the results go to Washtenaw County, and then Jenny, they send out letters to the homeowners, and then I start getting copies of all that is sent out, and then I start updating the database.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be on the July one probably.
No, they won't have it in July here. If they don't have the results back from the lab, it's gonna be a couple months before all the letters go out. I may start getting trickle in, but I won't have it all completed in July for the July. I don't think I'm gonna give it a shot, but I don't think I'll have all the information to update the database completely in July for July samples.
Okay.
Then let's see. What's new?
What's new?
Yes. Again, I reiterate that as I promised last time, we will be doing the surface water sampling here in August, September, probably more toward September. In September, again, it'll be all the surface waters that we've done in the past. We've added the Honey Creek at Miller Road though this year too. We will do that. And then we will do the West Park, the Allen Creek, West Park, and down there at Chapin. I have to get that coordinated and then pop the manholes. I'm not allowed to do that myself. So we coordinated with the city and get that done. That'll be in.
Can you?
Yeah.
Can you when you have the schedule, can you share it with the card?
Sure.
Admin at least, and we can pass it out to the people that are really interested in it.
I have not set a date. Again, it's just how we're opening things up and doing field work, and frankly, I need a little help from but we're short staffed and we're on 1 day a week layoff, and so it's tough. So that's why I'm saying more likely September.
But nobody died yet, so that's good.
No. We've been hunkering down and I haven't heard of anybody in real trouble in EGLE because of the COVID. So, and then the other issue I wanted to bring up is Gelman has started to clean, or they did some cleaning up of the Honey Creek, the unnamed tributary near the outfall. Some debris removal. They were having some problems with all the debris downstream of the outfall. So they started doing some working with our water resources group and started some debris removal already. That is an allowed work. It's an exempt activity. You don't need a permit, for removing the trees and removing the brush that has fallen into the creek. They are planning on doing, I think they finished a lot of that and are looking at taking a look at the sediment in that area of the outfall, just because it hasn't been done in years to improve the efficiency of the honey, so they don't have problems because they are still discharging the 475 plus or minus gallons per minute for their treatment system. So that's coming up.
So
that would be
they're going to do some sediment sampling then too, right? Sediment sampling sometime
that would
soon.
be it's a permitted activity, and our water resources people that I'm in Jackson, Melissa Latowski is the person that's working with them. She has already identified that there'll be need, for taking sediments out of there, they'll have to do the analysis, sediment analysis, which will include dioxane, but other required parameters just under a normal sediment removal activity. It's not a big area. It's just because of what is because it has filled in with the debris and sediment. They need to make that a little more efficient so they don't have backups in high water times and keep the discharge efficient as it moves.
Well, the discharge is always backed up from the discharge point back into the marshy area there.
But
are they saying
it is?
They're not gonna. That's not gonna happen anymore.
Oh, I can't say that, Roger. I'm just saying that it has. They have not done maintenance of that.
I think I'd suggest and pass along this suggestion that they do some before and after pictures and do a little PR for their cause here.
Okay, I'll pass that on. But that's I wanted to keep you updated on that. Like I said, there'll be a permit required. There'll be a permitting process. So once it has not been submitted back to EGLE, so that's available once the permit comes in. It's a public, public document. So you'll be able to see. But there is testing. That's the first question I had to Melissa. It is a
right,
site. We have a list, and they've already.
So, any discussion or Dan's updates here? Anybody want to weigh in on any of the 3 items that he covered? 4 items. I see no hands raised. Okay. I guess we'll go into my update. We got in record time the monthly sampling results from Gelman. They send directly to me, as well as the same time they sent it to the DEQ or to the EGLE. It's not the DEQ format, so it's hard to analyze, but I've, in the last several months, have a little routine that checks to see in this simple aggregated monthly Excel spreadsheet, which wells are going up. In other words, which wells have had their highest ever readings. And there are 3 wells that have had their highest ever readings, and they're all in the Western Plume, and 2 of them are north of I-94 in the neighborhoods where there is no access to city water. So I'm going to bring up a little display that shows those, if I can find them here. Or I'll just bring up the Google Earth and show you what it looks like there. No, I have them here somewhere. Hold on. This is the one. share. Took some screenshots earlier. So this is one of the locations. It's MW 139S. So it's north of 94. It's south of the other monitoring well that didn't show up, but it's this home on Breezewood had one part per billion last year or year and a half ago. But now this well, it's even a little shallower than the Breezewood well, is showing 1 part per billion. So let me go to that, zoom back out, go to the next screen. So if I were to graph it, it would look like that. And then of course, the deep one also had a hit earlier, a couple, 3 years ago, but now it's gone up to like 1.5 parts per billion. So there's movement of dioxane in this area that wasn't predicted. The other well that went up is in the center of the western plume, MW61D, and it was around 7 parts per billion, and it just went up 20% or whatever to 8.5 parts per billion. So there's still high concentration, rising concentrations in these areas. And since 7.2 should be the cleanup standard, this is a concern. Now, I'm also going to show you what Gelman showed as their modeling back in 2015 for this area. And this is this is the last time that we've seen them show a one part per billion line. Most of their maps in the last dozen, 15, 20 years shows 85 parts per billion, the cleanup standard. But here they actually showed what it was going to be at 1 part per billion. And of course, this 1 part per billion area doesn't touch upon these new hits, either at the Breezewood site or these other wells that are north of 94. So their modeling wasn't predictive of what reality has become. In fact, even Larry Lipke's modeling, his students didn't predict this. The only model that I found that predicted this, I think, was from Northern Michigan. Student did one. I don't have the slide of that ready to show, but it showed it going more northward here. We were concerned about this hit on Breezewood because this could have come from the plume making it over here, but it also could have come from discharge to the creek, since this is a losing part of the creek, at least sometimes of the year, and putting up to 7 parts per billion into the tributary that makes into Honey Creek. And during dry times of the year, like we're about to enter into, this tributary forms a lot of Honey Creek's flow. That might be contributing to these contaminations in the shallow wells near the creek. And that might have been what happened to Breezewood. I'm not sure you can make that same assumption here. It looks more like this is coming from farther south. And if you look at the student modeling that was done, that it still may just be the extension of the plumes from the core up through this area. So I just want to make people aware of that. This is new developing news. And this is in spite of Gelman cutting back on certain monitoring wells that Dan alluded to earlier. There's certain wells that are no longer sampled. And of course, they're not putting in any new sampling wells at the rate they were for several years. So you see highest ever readings on wells because it was the first time the well was put in, first time the area was actually sampled. It took a few years for these hits to show up here on these relatively new wells. But you might ask then, well, if this is happening here, how do we know it's not happening anywhere else? You know, at certain elevations that aren't being sampled now. So that's an ongoing concern that I have. Let me go back to the, that's part of the data review that I have. A major part of what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is we're using another display program, Tableau Public. Tableau Public is free, and it provides a lot of the motion chart options that you see with, used to see with Hans Rosling's Gapminder and stuff like that. So I've started putting these guys together. I think I shared this with the group earlier, and I'm updating it every few days. So what we have here are all the sample locations, and you can play the years. It's going to take a minute for it to reload here because it's actually loading this from the cloud to update. And with all the other stuff I'm doing right now, it may take a moment to start. And then when you hit play, it'll start out in 1985, 86, 87. You can control this slider bar manually too. The size of the circle is the amount of dioxane, in the center of that circle is where the sample point is. You can stop it at any point. This is kind of like Google Earth in that way, and you can pick out a circle and get the information about it registered on the screen. Unlike Google Earth, you can have more than one of those active at a time, so you could do another one. And then when you want to go back to what it was, you just click outside that and it goes away, and you can continue your playing of the modeling here. So you can see where the dioxane's been and where it's going, and you can pop in information. You can zoom in and out. I haven't figured out how to overlay the prohibition zone and some of the plume maps yet, but that'll be coming soon. So that brings us up to 2019 for the X and Y. I've also done this vertically so that you can again, it has to reload the sheet here. I've got like 7 sheets here so far that show different information and different orientations. And this one coming up is going to show the if it ever does load. Am I coming through? Did anybody not hear me? I'm not breaking up any, it's just slow.
Yeah, you sound fine.
Okay, good. I don't know why this is taking so long, but this will show the vertical profile. And that's really interesting. I'd encourage you to go to this Tableau Public Gelman dioxane. Maybe I'll put it in the chat before I get off, and you can save the chat and go to a link later, or we can send it out as a link. Let me see if I just reload this, if it comes up faster. You know, this whole zooming thing while you're recording and having a couple screens running puts a lot of, here, this is coming up. Okay, so we click outside the area and we do the same thing. Except this time I'm going to manually take us through it. So these were the first wells that were sampled back in, what, 85, 86, and this will play through with some really high concentrations, shallow near the core. This is elevation over here on the left, and this is west to east, longitude. So what you're seeing here is the various layers of aquifers being contaminated from the very surface all the way down to bedrock throughout the whole site. Now, some of these turn out to be pretty defined aquifers, maybe, if you were able to narrow it down. Of course, the direction isn't really west to east, and it's really not south to north. It's kind of northeast in a lot of cases, and then northern in other parts. So with this, you can see where there might be holes in the data. You know, there's high concentrations here. How did that get there? Did it go down this way and come over? Did it go down through here? We really, and especially if you go back and look at like 2000. So here in 1998, 1999, and then all of a sudden, 2000, they started doing some sampling in the deep E aquifer, and then 2001, a little bit more sampling. So this area here was not being sampled for all those years, and yet we had some really high concentrations. We just want to make sure this isn't happening anymore. We got burned by this early on, and we had ended up with the whole E plume. All this area here got contaminated. By the way, if you want to look at any one particular of their arbitrary monitoring units, you can click over here and select like just the D2 or just the E, or if you want to see both at the same time, you hold control down when you click on it. So you can kind of get an idea that maybe the D2 and the E aren't really uniquely defined, because here we've got some wells that they claim are in the D2 that are really E elevation, and all the new wells around it are E. So gets back to the 1994 review that Camp Dresser McGee did for the DNR at the time, saying these aquifers designations are kind of arbitrary, that it's really one big aquifer. And to show it separately like Gelman does on the maps is not really telling the whole story. The Gelman maps do not put all of the plumes together in one map like you see on my Google Earth mashups. I've also has a similar display of this from south to north. So you can kind of see what's happening over time, south to north, because of course, north is where we don't want the dioxane to go, because there's Barton Pond north of this, and there's scores of township wells in the pathway before it gets to Barton Pond. So we have to really pay attention to where the dioxane is going. Now, how do you possibly monitor all this stuff? And which of these wells are no longer being monitored? And why was the monitoring stopped? Some of these deeper wells, somebody said, well, nobody's ever going to use that water, so we don't have to monitor it. Or who knows? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So that's one of the displays I wanted to show. Any questions about this before I go on? This is all interactive, so you can when you bring it up on your home computer, you'll be able to do everything that I'm doing here, and it'll work faster. And you can kind of look at the data yourself. You can even copy this, use it as a base, and make your own changes to it if you want to see things scale a little differently. So I'm going to quit sharing that for now. Go back to the agenda to see what else I'm supposed to be covering. Any questions so far? Dan, you want to say anything about that? You think you're up to using this, Dan?
That's on mute.
Somebody broke up right then. Say it again. Oh, you're on mute, Dan.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. I got your email before. I haven't looked at it other than, again, tonight when you're presenting.
It's a pretty cool program, and you know, you can do a lot for free, which is important for a lot of us. And it's a very good decision tool, because the fact that you can turn whole sets of data on or off quickly and control the viewing yourself. And by the way, for all you public officials, this is what's coming. This is so much better than just using Excel charts or anything like that. You'll start seeing a lot of this in a lot of your data-based decisions going forward. So.
Yeah, very helpful visuals, Roger. It's helpful to get that visual out there. I thought it was really creative when you sent that out a little while ago.
Yeah, I'll resend it out to the card core, and it's the same link. If you still have your old link, it'll still work. I try to share it back to the same link so you don't have to have a new link every time. There's some other data that I think as I get more time, I'll add to it, you know, and have other views. But especially in these times when we can't get together in the same room, having interactive displays like this to help people, especially new people, new officials, new elected officials, anybody new in the decision-making process, so they're all on the same page, I think can really help. You know, if nothing else, let's do that. Any other questions, comments, or anything? Patty, have you used this at all?
I have not.
It's relatively new this year, a lot of the features of it anyway. So for your work as a consultant, you may really glom onto this because it gives you a
it's
way
really
to
good
do
visual.
4 or 5 dimensions on one chart. Have you, and when I mentioned Gapminder and Hans Rosling, he was one of my go-to examples of how to do visuals of complex data. Okay. Before he died, he did several TED talks about how the world is getting better over the decades and centuries using available data. He and his son put together a product called Gapminder that does the same stuff and licensed it for Google for, I don't know, 5 years or something. And probably about 2012, it probably did license for it. So I've been looking for something to replace that and had a Tableau license or sign up, but I didn't want to pay the $15 a month or whatever it costs to do the pro version. But then this Tableau Public came out, and anybody, you know, can use it. It kind of requires public data, which in my realm is just fine because the more people know about this, the better the outcome's going to be. So I highly recommend it. Now, the next item on the agenda here is Allen Creek sampling. Is there a date? Now, I didn't write this. Suggestion from Card. Now, again, this gets back to whether we're going to do regular sampling in Allen Creek when we really should be just doing, at least at a minimum, permanent shallow groundwater sampling to know what's the dioxin in the groundwater, because that's going to be that's really where anything in the drain is going to be coming from. Is going to be entering in through the groundwater and get diluted some in the drain and maybe not getting diluted as much in homeowner basements. So anybody want to weigh in on this again? We kind of beat this to death earlier, but Vince or Bob, do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, I want to make a comment about the groundwater flowing through those drains. As dry as it is right now, there's huge amounts of groundwater flowing through those drains at West Park and on 8th Street next to Slauson Middle School. So those are picking up groundwater. The groundwater is not contaminated with rainwater because we have not had rainwater for weeks now, and it's very dry out. Trying to keep our garden alive, watering it. I think one of the issues that we brought up is, these are simple tests. If you want to just test the drain that has groundwater coming out of it like crazy, that's a quick and dirty test. In lieu of, I would much rather prefer permanent wells, as we've been asking for years, and have been, not.
That's a more direct measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. But in lieu of that, I think these tests are so simple. At least there's something.
Sampling in the drain is not a substitution for sampling.
Yep,
I think everybody can agree to that. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Me. I just was going to ask, I think I carried that over from last month and accidentally left it. I'm sorry. But number 7, Vince, you wanted to ask about the 8th Street drain. Do you want to ask that right now too? Or
I just dovetail it in. Like I said, I was just down on the 8th Street just about 2 hours ago. Happened to be down there on my bike going on an errand. And it's flowing like all get out. I don't know how many gallons a second. It's like, this huge amount of flow through there. And in lieu of doing these other tests, which I'd rather see done with permanent shallow groundwater measurements, this is a very simple test. I don't even know if you have to take the manhole off because you could just put a sampler right down into it and grab it. The West Park has a much tighter grid, so it's harder to get into that drain. This drain at Slauson is much more open. So, as far as Dan Hamel's concerned, I think, if you could consider doing that test while you're doing West Park before we get any permanent wells, but I would rather see permanent wells in, no question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Somebody else was going to talk.
So that's just my point about, the 8th Street. There's a lot of groundwater also flowing through that drain. So that may be an opportunity to get a better handle on if it's spreading to the south into neighborhoods, again, that have high water table, wet basements.
Well, all groundwater is just old rain.
Yeah, all the 8th Street samples before were 1 or less than 1 ppbs, but I mean, we'd have no objection to helping facilitate that. I mean, it's probably a question of resources. So
yeah, who's going to pay for this? If we still had a polluter pay law, it'd be no question where the payment's going to come from this. But again,
well,
you only got so much money. Do you allocate it for sampling in the drain, or do you first sample in the groundwater where the dioxane actually is? So I think we beat that to death enough.
With you there, but I certainly hope to get a sample or 2 each year until those permanent wells are in there. But I think the pipes where we have seen things creep up versus where it's low and haven't seen any change, I think we're going to want to see longer term, even after the monitoring wells are in there. But the gospel, like you say, Roger, is what's actually in the groundwater. I think for purposes of mass balance, it would be wise to keep track of not only the concentrations, but I'm going to work on trying to get at least an estimate of flow volumes, that come through West Park, because we can back out, some very crude estimates of, well, what does that mean for mass, though? Do
you have any historical flow values for the different sections of the drain?
I don't believe we have anything for dry weather flow. We might have some studies in the past where at least they've come up with some, general information. But I'm thinking of more going in there and saying, okay, it's 4 inches deep. This is, we found that it's 4 inches deep or 8 inches deep X number of times, and this is the cross-sectional area of this pipe at 4 inches deep. Therefore, we can figure out, annual, mass per year. Very crude, but I honestly can't wrap my head around, Roger or everyone on the call, over the course of, if 2017, it was 4.4 ppb. Let's just say it started in the middle of 2017. That water's been moving for 3 years straight. I can't wrap my head around if that's 100 pounds, 1,000 pounds, or 10,000 pounds. I have to go very slowly with conversions and calculations on that type of thing. But you get what I'm saying, that I think it is relevant to understand the mass balance of this. And that's a reason to be measuring pipe, and keeping in mind that not all of the dioxane mass that's traveling to the river is in the pipe. I don't know how much of it is traveling in the trench around the pipe, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's a similar amount, just a thought.
I would make a point that the West Park well, or sampling of the drain, I thought went up fairly quickly over a short period of time. So it's not like, we're going to have years and years to do these tests. I think we need to, start on this. We're already at 22 part per billion in West Park, and I think that's a concern. And I don't think we should just constantly, be kicking the can down the road, saying, well, we can do it later. I think we have an opportunity at West or at 8th Street. It's a quick and dirty test like West Park was. In fact, I didn't think West Park would show anything, but I do know that it was 1,000 part per billion at Vets Park at one time, and that's moving to the east, and it's moving to West Park, probably moving to 8th Street as well. So we need to, I think, take advantage of any opportunities we have here and collect data where we can, and hopefully get permanent wells put in so we can get a better handle on where it's flowing, where it's coming from, and where it's going.
Well, here's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
This is one of the places it's coming from, a relatively new well to replace these that were shut down because of the Planet, what was that, LA Fitness or whatever. Here's a well that's been going up for 4 years. And that's could be feeding into the channel that feeds down to MW82S that continues to go up. So this is what's coming. Why do we not have monitoring wells, permanent monitoring wells, down gradient from this one, showing the pathway of where it's going? This is the last monitoring well at that elevation. There's no more shallower wells down gradient that are permanent. And it's such a no-brainer to say, well, this is where the dioxane is. Let's put some monitoring in to see where it's going so we have a heads up before it gets there and gets into people's basements. And let's cut off the dioxane. We know it goes in narrow channels at high concentrations, like Larry Lemke says, and we happen to find a handful of those narrow channels, but it's certainly not a nice, even plume map like the company provides. We need more monitoring to know where these high concentrations are. And
so I have a real concern, Roger, that the plan was to allow this to flow through the city to the river. It was a crazy plan to begin with.
Well, there's no plan.
It was the weak, very weak.
It was a concession. It was a concession by a person who didn't want to get into the details.
So this is really throwing a wrench in that whole plan. If this stuff is starting to migrate to the surface, this is basically what they proposed, that it flow through the city to the river, but it wasn't supposed to come to the surface. It was never described as that, as a potential. And this is now, clearly migrating near the surface. And I don't think there's any surprise here, because Paul actually drew a map that predicted this would happen exactly at this location. So that map was drawn in 2006. So people have not been on the ball with this, including the regulators. And I think, definitely Paul and Gelman have not been on top of it. And so I think, we can't just assume that this is going to stay under the ground, not come to the surface, because
Absolutely
it's doing it now.
What I liken it to, Vince, an analogy I've been using lately, we need contact tracing for this pandemic outbreak right here. This is very much like COVID getting hit here, and there's going to be some contact. The water.
I don't think this is the only one. I think we happened to hit on this accidentally. There's probably a lot more.
We don't know. We just don't know.
Flowing under the city, under neighborhood, and that's one reason I'm suggesting. That's one reason I'm suggesting 8th Street as an option to test.
Kristen's trying to say something.
This is not a pandemic. Yeah, with all due respect, this is not a pandemic, which is global and worldwide, right? So.
Wrong word.
I think we just want to use the correct language when we're describing different things, as someone who is working very deeply on the COVID outbreak.
Yeah, the time scale on this is
In
different.
different languages is very confusing to the public.
But some of the people's response to it is very similar.
And it's not to say that it's not important, and it's not to be taken seriously, and not to put a lot of efforts into it. But again, just making sure that we're using the appropriate terminology.
Thank you for that correction. Do you want to say something about what the county's been having to do for COVID? Because it really affects all of us.
Sure. I don't know how much time you have or what you want to speak to, but the health department has been deeply engaged for maybe 5 months now, since February. We've been, as you mentioned, doing contact tracing. So every positive case that is identified as in a Washtenaw County resident goes through our public health department, where a public health nurse talks to them or a family member in case they are deceased or unable to communicate because they're on a ventilator. We talk to find out where they may have been exposed, where they may have gone. Our contact tracing, which is a thing that we've been doing since the start of time in public health, but I think people are becoming more familiar with, has more than doubled in just a few days, and I think has doubled since then again, now that we are back to work. So it is infinitely more challenging to try and keep track of everybody and all of their contacts. We are taking in hundreds, if not thousands, thousands of calls and emails that have resulted in hundreds of complaints for various mask wearing, not social distancing concerns. And we've all been putting in long, long hours on all of those things.
Been on the 100-hour-a-week plan for quite some time, but she's too polite to mention that.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not actually that polite, but I am tired.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rough. And, you know, everybody's adjusting, but the critical key people like you are very important to manage this.
So thank you. Yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you haven't already, I will put a plug in for our website because we've got a ton of great information on.
Yeah, I follow the daily numbers that get released about 3 o'clock every day and have my own chart of it. And then I also read Andy Slavitt's Twitter feed at the end of the day, where he's talked to all governors and experts, and he gives a rundown of what he's learned and what he's shared. And then you hear about it in the news the next day. So the information is getting out there, and that's really key now for people to have good, solid, truthful information. And that's the part I think that's transferable to the government situation, to have good data, accurate data, and good analysis. And always be pushing for that.
And dare I say, good public health resources and infrastructure.
Right.
Putting my own plug in.
Absolutely. What happened? I was trying to share something. Oh, I did share it. Oh, yeah. I'm not used to working with two screens all the time. So it looks like the next card meeting is going to be the August one conflicts with the primary election. So what are people's view about shifting that a week or a day? Anybody want to weigh in on that? I know, Beth, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah. I'd prefer to move it even the next day if we could. It's the quarterly though. So it's the 10 in the morning. I don't know if moving a 10 in the morning Tuesday to a 10 in the morning Wednesday is difficult for.
Well, if anybody here an election worker, because if you're an election worker, you're going to be counting absentee ballots for the next week after the spring.
With the quarterly on the agenda, identified as just a monthly.
Say again, Dan.
Oh,
it's the quarterly.
You're right.
Agenda is a September.
You're right. It's a 6 p.m. So can we move it to the next day, Wednesday at 6 p.m. or cancel altogether? Or Or does anyone, and maybe I'll just be missing and everyone else can carry on too? Discussion.
I wouldn't mind canceling it. I don't know what other people think.
I agree with you guys. I mean, just to speak for myself, I'll also not be there on election day. That's classically a pretty busy day for us. And my guess is that any other elected officials would probably also be having a busy day, or people representing elected officials would be having a busy day.
And the people on this call who are running for office, they might be a little busy that day too.
That would be my guess.
I don't have a primary challenger, but I think that it's a busy day, and I certainly wouldn't want to create a situation that would encourage anyone not to vote. So
Right.
I'd be supportive of changing the day.
Maybe what we'll do is have an informal hangout and, you know, not have a formal agenda, just have a time where people can connect if they have anything new to get ready for a September meeting. And that doesn't have to be on that same day. We can have a discussion about it before, you know, and then the other elected officials, Diane, Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Do you mean to keep the Tuesday and have an informal meeting, or move it to Wednesday?
Yeah, between those two choices, or
Oh,
third choice if you want.
either one would be fine.
Okay.
Fine with me.
I mean, there's some well, I guess there won't, one good thing about election day, pretty sure there's not going to be any board meetings that night, right? Anybody got a Tuesday board meeting on August 4th? So if you're going to vote by mail, you can certainly hang out. Anybody else want to weigh in? Should we make a decision today, or do you want to have a couple proposals and think about it for another few days? Nobody cares.
It sounds like people really are in. I didn't hear. I heard several people say that they would be in favor of it being canceled. So you know, it just depends if we want to cancel or reschedule.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
it is August, and you know, to have 1 month off is probably not the end of the world.
Yeah, we've done this before.
Unless maybe something comes up with the consent judgment, and then so maybe we could just say canceled for now, but we could always form a pop-up meeting even if we get word about the consent judgment.
I like that idea.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay.
I think it's very unlikely the consent judgment issue is going to have any effect on this, because by the time it gets through discussions with the attorneys to figuring out a date to set it, there's no way there's going to be even a public hearing before that date.
Yeah.
Not even close, I don't think.
Good point.
We didn't do number 6. We have no idea what's going on with the consent judgment negotiations. We kind of skipped over 6, but I guess there's probably is nothing to report.
It kind of overlaps.
Mike would know more.
Yeah, I can't. I've had other discussions since the last meeting with some people in Scioview Township, in the city, and also in the county. My understanding is that there is a proposed consent judgment now, and that it is more than 100 pages and more than 100 pages of exhibits besides, but of course I haven't seen it, so I can't verify that. But I understand it's large, and that the expectation for timing of any of the discussion, any public discussion, is that it'll be some distance in the future, because at least amongst the people I talked to, there first needed to be a discussion between whatever board it is and their attorneys, and then they have to, you know, they got to be a presentation put together for that, and then a discussion, then they have to set a public meeting date, and the expectation was it was going to be at least many people's estimate, another couple of months anyway. I don't know if Sue, you can add anything or not.
No, probably not. I think Mike can speak more freely than I can, and I sent a note to our attorney.
And with less knowledge.
Well, right, but that's the thing that's so awful about the secrecy surrounding the negotiations. I can tell you that we had a closed session at our last meeting, and that I guess that's really all.
Okay.
When's the last time the whole group met together? Months and months ago?
Yeah, last spring.
Yeah.
Right. So before everything shut down.
Vets, you and I we're almost there. Remember when the last time they met?
Yeah, we were in the we just showed up at
the
we just showed up at the courtroom for the fun of it.
So the county, is it true then that the county did not set up a date for any public hearing yet?
No, we have not.
Have you even had a presentation from your attorneys?
We had a closed session with our attorney.
Okay. On what was in the consent judgment?
Well, I guess I'm just a little nervous about saying too much. I guess.
Well, I think you can say. I can think you can say you discuss substance without telling us what the substance
your
is.
imagination
I mean, come
for
on.
a while. No, we talked about the Gelman case, and we talked about the public comment issue, and I guess what I would ask is, Dan Hamel, are you able to say anything about the state's position on public comment?
I'm kind of unsure what your question. What do you mean, say something on public comment?
Well, I didn't know
as I understand that each of the interveners are going to take once everybody gets together, it's still under confidentiality agreement with the judge. So one of the first steps is you have to go to the judge, and as the group, all participants have to go to the judge and tell him that you're ready. And then he has to he lifts that confidentiality, and then it can start being taken out to the individuals, individual local units of government and the interveners. That's when that can be started to discuss outside the legal team and the negotiating team. So that's the first process. As far as a public comment, it's going to be up to each of the individuals, each of the interveners, each group to hold their version of what their stakeholders want.
And Ann Arbor City Council had a special, the 29th or whatever that Monday was, the 28th, special meeting for the closed session, and they did a couple other little things before it, but I think they said we need to start getting ready, was what I heard. For it to be public sometime soon was what.
Right, but the judge will have to lift that confidentiality agreement. So, everybody's going to have to, meet with him, and that's when the trigger will be pulled to be able to stakeholders, which you have been very interested. We'd like to see what's been discussed for 3 years.
Okay, we're coming up on a hard stop here, so I noticed, Harvey, you didn't have a chance to introduce yourself. Do you want to say, unmute and say who you are and introduce yourself to the participants here?
Harvey Summers. I'm a resident in Scioview Township, retired here after a career in the U.S. Foreign Service in 2009. Have been fairly active following Scioview Township trustees and planning commission things, and have been interested in this issue all along. I go to Jewish services, so I missed the middle of your meeting, but I come for the beginning and the end.
Well, if everything goes right, we'll have the video up here in a couple of days. You can watch the beginning part of it.
Good, thank you.
Click something wrong once or twice, but we'll see. All right, I think that should do it. We're going to cancel the August meeting pending any developments with the settlement. we might have a pop-up meeting some other time in August, but probably not on that primary day. So thanks everybody for coming. Any
Thanks for
last
setting it
minute?
setting it up, Roger.
I'm sorry?
Thanks for setting up the Zoom meeting. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a little bit of a technical challenge because I have to do like 3 things at once. But you know, at least I'm not having to do contact tracing with all of you. All right, thanks again. We'll talk again
Thank you.
soon.
All right, thank you.
Stay well, everyone.
Stay safe. Stay safe. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.